it started back in 1980 when I was a young girl, and I went to school in the south of England at a kind of polite little place, a seaside town. I was a boarder, and there were also day pupils, and the twain were never supposed to meet. And the day that Susie Johnson and I became friends, people started to shake their heads, because I already had a kind of bad reputation, because as a boarder I wasn't really supposed to date day boys, but I was dating a day boy, a charming young man, and I'd been told by my boarder girlfriends that a boarder boy would never look at me again as a result of this, but I was prepared to go there. But Susie Johnson, I never thought I'd be friends with her, because she had an appalling reputation as a kind of slut, really. There were stories about her having shagged Kevin Pembroke in the field behind the old mill, which were believable. And another story, which was, I knew for sure was true, because I knew the guy, Billie Garrity, who she was giving a blowjob in her parents' attic when Billee's DM'd foot went through the ceiling and awoke her elderly father, who was snoozing on his recliner. So it was a non-starter, really, but Susie and I both wanted to be actresses. And that year, The French Lieutenant's Woman was going to be filmed in our town, and we weren't surprised, either of us, that the casting director, a guy called Gary Beck, chose both of us, because of course we thought we were superlative actresses. He later revealed that we just looked like the naughtiest girls, so that's why he chosen us. So filming was completely boring. We walked up and down the street in these dowdy outfits, trying to look like comely wenches, and we were entirely cut. There's like a shot of my back in the opening sequence, but that's it. The parties were a lot of fun, and that was exactly why we'd been hired, because we were supposed to be the fun, and we were. But I got expelled because I'd arrived back at 7 in the morning to find one of my mistresses sat on my bed waiting for me. And Susie, who was a day girl, ran away to London to live with the casting director. So she was living with him in Twickenham in a garden flat, and some months later I turned up and she said, well, I've got to go to work now and I'll be back later. And I was like, well, what are you doing? And she was like, well, I don't know whether I want to tell you. And I was like, okay. Anyway, she came home at about 2 in the morning with a huge carton of cigarettes and a big box of Belgian chocolates, and it's like, what are you doing? She was a topless hostess, and she was working in a club in St James, which is a very posh little part of central London, and Gary, ever resourceful, had filmed an episode of a TV show called The Sweeney in this nightclub, and had spent the whole time chatting up the girls, and found out they made a lot of money, and so sent his teenage girlfriend down there to get a job. So it wasn't long before I was there too, because the policy of the club was to have some real working girls who really worked and who were kind of older and raddled and hardened, and then there was like fresh meat like me and Susie, who were young and stupid and barely tolerated by the older women, and kept on a very tight rein by Maureen, our boss. And so there we were, topless hostesses, wandering around in our sort of cami knickers and our suspenders and our curiously open-toed sandals, which was a stipulation. I guess that's something to do with the 80s, but anyway. So the things I learnt at the Gaslight were how to tip an entire bottle of Dom Perignon on the carpet but act completely drunk, how to stave off small grabbing hands while eating large mouthfuls of scampi, and how to get the guys to buy 120 cigarettes and a box of chocolates, and that everyone has a price, most importantly. But anyway, the way things went in the club was guys would come into the bar and girls would get them to go into the restaurant with them, where they would pour champagne on the floor and eat the scampi and watch the strip shows and get the cigarettes and the chocolates. And some guys just loved that kind of abuse, and they'd come back and come back and come back, and they became your regulars. And even when they didn't really want to be with you, you kind of staked a claim to them, and they had to kind of hang out with you. And Susie had a regular called Paul Williams, who was a self-made businessman from the north of England who had made a small fortune selling cut-price mattresses. And he was rather proud of himself, and Susie rather liked him because a lot of these guys were really elderly and grotesque. And, okay, 4 minutes left. So, moving rapidly on, Paul Williams, not a very impressive guy. He boasted about wearing cheap suits because he thought he was sort of Steve McQueen or something and could carry it off, but he was really wretched. But very resourceful, and he wanted to get into the sex industry, and this is the early 80s, so phone lines were just starting, and he went out and he secured a whole bank of them, and he got a load of advertising space in, you know, things like the Sun and the News of the World and all the wretched kind of tabloid newspapers, and so he needed scripts. So Susie and I joined his company as script writers and voiceover actresses, because of course we still wanted to be actresses. But we had no experience except for being these kind of hapless, topless hostesses. And so we just kind of made it up as we went along, and we'd record these scripts. Each script was 3 minutes, which Paul Williams, in his wisdom, figured was long enough for the average punter to have a wank. So the whole point of the script was to set up a scene and bring the listener to, you know, the point of ecstatic no return within 3 minutes. So that's what we set out to do, and I do believe we invented the 3-minute wank script. So basically in England things are quite controlled, and the obscenity laws are quite strict. So you can't actually say penis or vagina or, you know, anything really graphically sexual, although I did remember this afternoon that nipple and buttocks were okay. So the flavour of these scripts was very kind of Benny Hill. It was all sort of auto-suggestion, and lots of bacon and kind of obscure references to cricket bats, and, you know. But all accompanied by a massive amount of kind of passionate sighing. And to record this stuff, we had to drink a lot, and we also had to smoke a lot of hash. And when we did lesbian scripts, we had to drink a lot of whiskey and smoke a lot of hash. But anyway, so as our phone line business developed, we... Okay, so we were happily writing these scripts, and listeners were ringing in, and Paul Williams was very happy with us, and we kind of set our own agenda, and we decided that what we really liked was the episodic kind of scripts where we would develop a character, and then it would make it much easier for us because we just go back to the same character over and over. And the first, and I like to think the most popular, was Stern Sadie, who had a sex school for slaves in Belgravia in her basement, where She did all kinds of unimaginably horrible things to all these poor, unsuspecting guys. And you have to understand that Susie and I really had very, you know, we weren't dominatrixes and we didn't really know. So consequently, Sadie was just absolutely horrible. But very popular with the guys. And she really didn't have to do that much, and she only had 3 minutes for each episode, so she would start always by addressing the caller as the worm. Hello, worm, she would say. How unutterably, intolerably annoying of you to call right now. And I have this pathetic, wretched, bleeding, scabby individual, Dennis here, who's helping me lace me into my black leather studded, spiked corset, that kind of thing. So Stone Sadie did these things, and you know, I really just don't know. I mean, I guess it worked because people always called in for Sadie, and after a while, it's goodbye and thanks, but after a while, we ran out of things to say. We didn't know what to do, so we put out a message, or Sadie put out a message saying, worms, if you really want to come to the sex school for slaves, you have to tell me what you'd like me to do. And we had nearly 400 responses, and it was pretty terrifying, really. There was nothing vaguely legal or anything like Benny Hill that we could do. And in the parting, let me just tell you how Sadie ended, because the last set of episodes I wrote featured a very submissive dwarf, and it was huge fun writing it. And of course, there are things you can do to a dwarf that you can't do to other kinds of worms.